Ed Knudsen here, just doing my presentation on the Windows Server 2008 role Hyper-V. It's Windows Server's version of running virtual machines. So first up, you obviously need to install Windows Server. You can also install Hyper-V as a standalone machine as well. You don't have to actually buy Windows Server licensing to run it. You can run it for free and just run Hyper-V instead of running it on top of Windows Server as a role. But the way I did it was running it on top of Windows Server. So that's one of the more common ways to run Hyper-V, it seems. I installed Windows Server and I also installed the updates. You see here that our updates are configured to use Windows Update Services, so it's managed by our system administrator and they approve the patches for the machine. So next up I enabled RDP because I was installing this on a physical box. That was my only access to it at the moment, was standing at the actual server in the server room. The RDP protocol will enable you to connect remotely. I wasn't able to run this as a virtual machine because it needs to have direct access to AMD V and Intel VT and AMD V technologies on the processor, so you need to install it on the actual box, and also you don't want to run a hypervisor as a virtual machine unless you're just doing some testing. It's not very practical. So I enabled RDP and I set a password on the account so that I was able to connect remotely. Next up, I set a static IP address. Normally you'd do this from the NIC properties, but I set a reservation in DHCP instead. So you can see here that there's a few NICs on the server that have reservations created for them with certain IP addresses. Next up, I installed the Hyper-V role. First off, you have to go to Server Manager and then you go to Roles and you add the Hyper-V role. You'll have to restart the server after you do that. After you install Hyper-V, you can go to the Hyper-V Manager to view the interface. Right now there's no virtual machines installed, obviously, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like. So before I created my first VM, I had to add the ISOs that I was going to use to the server. You can also use a network path or physical media installed on the server, or not even installed on the server, you can have it in the CD tray. So here you see I used Windows XP and I had 2 ISOs for Windows XP on the server. When I was creating my first VM, I went through the new virtual machine wizard. I used the ISO that was stored on the hard disk to install. You can see that I put 512 megabytes of memory for the machine, and there's the path to the ISO and also the path to the hard disk file. It creates a virtual hard disk file. Here's the installation of XP, and it also shows you the console for the virtual machine. You can see that there are a few different options along the top there: file, action, media, clipboard, view, and help. And then you've got some buttons there along the top. The one on the left is Control Delete. There's a stop, power off, shut down, pause, resume, and a couple other buttons as well. Now, one thing with XP that you won't encounter with Windows Server is the most integration services, or just integration services as Hyper-V calls it. And what happens is there has to be a service running on the virtual machine to allow mouse control inside of the VM. It doesn't use a KVM functionality or any sort of mouse driver on the machine. It actually has to have an integration services service running to use a mouse in the VM. This goes for Linux machines as well, so later on you'll see the limitations that this can instill on using Hyper-V in your current infrastructure. But on Windows XP, integration services does not come with the installation because Windows XP was released much before Hyper-V came out, so you'll have to use a keyboard to install Windows XP and then once it's installed, you can install the integration services service. Here's the second VM that I installed. It's Windows Server 2008, and this one I was able to use the mouse on because it has integration services built into the operating system and into it has drivers built into the installation media as well. So it was very easy to install, and it goes pretty quick when you're using an ISO that's stored on the same hard drive or on the same server hard drive as the server that you're running Hyper-V on. So on that server, I installed and upgraded integration tools on the Windows Server 2008 R2 VM. This allows your mouse control in your VM, as I had previously said, but it also has some added backup options for volume shadow services. And after you install the integration services or upgrade them, you have to restart the VM. So I did that. And here's the supported operating systems for Hyper-V. This applies to the integration services. The integration services, as I previously said, has to be installed to use mouse control inside the VM, and there's some other added functionality with it as well. But only certain operating systems can support this service. Windows Server 2000, Windows Server 2003, 2008, 2008 R2, and then for Linux it supports Red Hat 5 and 6, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, SUSE Linux 10 and 11, and CentOS 5 and 6. This is the current list. I just took it off the website, so that's what they're supporting right now. And for client systems, it supports Windows 7, Windows Vista, and Windows XP. So you can see that Windows is pretty well covered, but Linux doesn't have a lot of coverage by Hyper-V, so if you're running Linux VMs, you might be better suited to look towards an alternative hypervisor for your environment. And also, you should keep in mind that in the future you may want to run some sort of Linux that isn't supported by Hyper-V, and just you might not be running it right now, but just keep an eye on the future and think about whether or not that will impact your organization when you decide to go with Hyper-V. Another nice thing about Hyper-V is that on the server you don't need to have the console open or even be logged into the server to have the VMs running. They actually run as a service. You see here under services there's multiple services that pertain to Hyper-V, and as soon as the server starts up, nobody even has to be logged in, and it will start the virtual machines if you configure to do so, as I'll show you in a moment. This is where you would configure the VM to start with the server. This is in the VM settings. This is automatic start option. You can automatically start it if the VM was running when the service was stopped. Like if you had a shutdown of the server and the VM was running, when the server restarts, it'll start up that VM if it's able to. You can have it always start automatically or never start automatically. You can also set a delay, which would be really helpful if your server has other things running on it, because a virtual machine starting up as soon as the server starts up could cause some lag or intense resource usage at the time of startup. Or if you've got multiple VMs, you'd probably want to vary the startup times so that they're not all starting right as soon as the server starts up. Here's VM networking configuration. This is also a very useful thing on Hyper-V VMs. You can set a static MAC address. I've seen this used when you are virtualizing a current infrastructure that is all housed on physical machines, and you want to keep the MAC address the same as the physical machine had when you're virtualizing that server. And that way you don't have to change any of your reservations or anything else that's MAC address sensitive. You can use the exact same MAC address as the physical machine had. Also VLAN IDs. If you've got multiple VLANs on the network, you can set a VM to use a certain VLAN right here, and that's something that we do at LSC. We've got multiple VLANs and we set our VMs to use a certain VLAN on our network. Another thing that is extremely common when dealing with hypervisors is iSCSI storage. In this case, we are using a SAN for our iSCSI storage, but if you are on a tight budget, you could use something like a NAS, or you might even be able to do it with a server with special hardware. But the best option is to get a SAN. Even though they're very expensive, it's very good to be able to upgrade your storage in one area and have it very redundant and secure, and that's the technology that a SAN will offer you. A NAS can do iSCSI, but it is a much cheaper alternative that doesn't do it quite as well and is not as redundant as iSCSI can be. You can set multiple iSCSI discovery IP addresses on the SAN, and you configure those discovery addresses into the discovery tab here on the iSCSI initiator on the server, the host server, and then it'll connect to those SANs or SAN on those IP addresses. And you can see here there are 3 SANs that it'll recognize here, or at least 3 interfaces, and you see one of them is inactive and there's 2 connected. Discovery addresses, you can set multiple discovery addresses per SAN or per controller, and if one of those addresses is unreachable for some reason, you have others to rely on, and also your connectors, your Ethernet connections, can be redundant through multiple switches as well. So it really helps out to increase redundancy on your connection to the storage for the virtual machines. So once you've connected to the SANs, you can take that storage and mount it to a volume. In this case, it's mounted to the E volume, and you can see on computer, here it is here, the E volume Hyper-V data store. It is 1.9 terabytes in size, and we like to keep, at LSE, we like to keep our data stores under 2 terabytes. I'm not sure about the compatibility with Hyper-V, but with ESXi, at least on version 4, you have to have a data store less than 2 terabytes in size for it to be compatible. And that's Hyper-V. Keep in mind when you're choosing a hypervisor what the future of your infrastructure might be. Seriously look into getting the best hosts you can, so you can run as many virtual machines on them as possible. So it'll help you save a lot of money on power and upgrade costs. You won't have to upgrade multiple servers as well. Get a nice SAN if you're serious about virtualizing servers, and that way all your storage will be centralized and very redundant. They're very expensive, but it's an excellent tool for an organization to have, especially when exploring virtualization and hypervisors. So I hope you enjoyed my presentation on Hyper-V, and I hope you all learned quite a bit.